want to thank Sam for co-teaching with me. I appreciate it, Sam Bradley. This has been a class on how to keep fear from scaring you to death, which is a good subject, a good thing to talk about. Because fear, to me, it's a big part of the human experience. And the scriptures teach us how to not let it get mastery over us. Because there are all kinds of destructive and bad things that happen when we let fear overcome our faith. And there's some really neat things we can learn to help us keep from doing that. And but it seems to me that life kind of prepares us to not be very brave. Y'all, any first grade teachers in here? If you've been one, if you take a 30-kid class of first graders and you say, how many of y'all want to draw a picture and show it to the class? How many will want to? Every one of them. Why? Gina said they want to be part of the class. I think it's because they think they're a great artist. Yeah. Yeah. All right, you take a bunch, all right, you let them grow 12 years and go to a 30-classroom of seniors in high school and say, now how many of y'all want to draw a picture today and show it to the class? You got to be pretty weird to want to do that, right? Either you're a really good artist or you're strange in some way. So what happened? Why don't the 12th graders want to do that? Pride and experience with people. I guess it's because they're afraid people won't like their picture. Yeah, life taught them that they might not be a great artist after all. And so life teaches us to not, it beats us down. From the time I'm old enough to put my hand on a hot stove and my mama slaps my hand and said, boy, stay away from that stove. Well, right there, I've learned that I don't know enough to stay alive on my own. And so life kind of does that to us. And my own self-analysis of myself is I have a history of really being scared of people. And I think it has to do with my upbringing, growing up not around people. But it also has to do with my siblings. I have 4 older siblings, and everything I did was wrong. Particularly everything I said was wrong. I remember before I went to school, I was probably 4 or 5, and my brother showed me some writing on something. And I sat there staring at it, and he said, what's the matter? Can't you read? What? Well, right there I learned I was too dumb for anything. And so, but my siblings taught me to not be brave and to not believe hardly anything that I could do anything. And I called my dad a liar one time, and that didn't go over worth anything. I was in the bathroom, and he was around the corner in his bedroom, and he said something that wasn't true. Well, he didn't know it wasn't true. He was saying it as if it was a fact, but I just happened to know that particular statement wasn't true. And I didn't have the eloquence yet to say, oh, I remember it this way, Dad. I thought it was like this. So I just said, well, you're a liar. Man, I learned right there that when you think you got something to say, you ought to sit there and think a while before you say it. and then don't say it. And, but it's the little bitty things like that that have profound effects on our courage, and we can learn stuff when we're that tall, and then when we're this tall, we're still believing it. And it has big negative effects on our influence in life and on our ability to have courage and have faith that God's going to see us through all these imperfections and all these character flaws and everything that's wrong with us. And so I don't want to be like that. Do you know David? He had an army, and I want you to listen to one of the guys in his army. This is in 1 Chronicles 11, and I'll just read it to you. It's starting in verse 22. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, mighty in deeds, struck down the two sons of Ariel and Moab, and he also went down and killed a lion inside a pit on a snowy day. That's all it says. I don't need to hear that story. He killed an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits tall, and what's cubit? Maybe 18 inches. In the Egyptian's hand was a spear like a weaver's beam, but he went down to him with a club and snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. And these things Benaiah the son of Jehoiada did, and David appointed him over the head of his guard. I want to have the courage of Benaiah. How does one get like that? Of course, I'm sure he had some skills. But in the past few weeks, we've been studying and creating kind of a foundation for courage. And I think God's people were created to be courageous. I really believe that. And our courage comes from our faith. And so in this study of how to keep fear from scaring us to death, we're really talking about how do we develop our faith in our Father. And that helps with our courage. And I've wondered a lot about faith, and I've heard people talk about faith a lot in my life. Been going to church a long time and studied a lot. And is faith just like a mountaintop experience? Is faith like an emotional high that you get where you just, like people say, well, he has a lot of faith. Well, that means he's up all the time and happy all the time. And I find some problems with that idea about faith in my own life. Because what I find in me is that my emotions go up and down. A lot of times they go up and down with my circumstances. And one guy said, my emotional state is in direct correlation to my cash flow. Well, so it can't be just that. And what I've come to believe is that the Bible says a little bit something different than that. Hebrews says faith is the substance of things hoped for, and it's the evidence of things not seen. So faith is really an attempt to believe things that aren't seen. If they were seen, it wouldn't be faith. So it's the effort to believe things that we're not able to see. And then it occurred to me that faith is, we use it in a religious sense, but faith is really not necessarily a religious word. It's kind of a behavioral term. It's in its base case, it's a decision to act a certain way, regardless of how we feel. And so I have a buddy from Arkansas down this weekend. We have a lot of pigs, wild hogs on our place. And I invited him down to harvest some hogs for his freezer. I got 2 buddies down. But, and so we have some cameras up in the woods, and we can look on a camera and see if there's a pig there or not. Well, so if I look on my camera and I say, whoa, there's a pig, let's go get him. And my wife's listening to me and she says, well, how do you know that pig is there? Isn't that the big question about faith? How do you know it's there? Well, the reason I know it's there is because I'm looking at him on my camera, on my phone, and I know he's there. And so we get in our buggy and we start driving off to where the pigs are. And when religious people talk about a walk, that's what they call a walk by sight. I see it and I'm going toward it. And it has a certain function to it. You know, it looks as if you're doing a logical thing. You see it and you're going toward it. Well, let's say that I don't have a camera in a certain spot in the woods, and I say, guys, let's go get that pig over there in the north pasture. And my wife says, well, how do you know it's there? That's a good question. How do I know it's there? If you answer, I'll repeat for it for the folks at home. Okay, I might have some evidence of having been there before. I might have some evidence of seeing some sign of it. Is that what you're talking about, Eric? Yeah, that's true. And I might have been there before and seen the pigs. That is correct. All that's true. And then there's some more truth, and that is I don't know they're there. I just kind of believe they are. So I'm going to get in my buggy, and I'm going to go out there. And if you notice, if you had a video camera and watched both scenes of the buggy going down the road, and one of them was, I see the pig on the camera, and the other one is, I don't see the pig on the camera, and then I take a video picture of the buggy going, it looks as if it's doing the exact same thing. The walk by sight looks exactly like a walk by faith. But the walk by faith just looks a little crazy to people who are used to walking by sight, because you don't have any real assurance that what you're going toward is there. Well, that's what we call walking by faith. That's what we want to learn how to do, because is it not true that everything in the minute following this one, we don't know it's there? We don't. We don't know what will happen to us. We don't know anything about what will happen to us in the next hour. We have some ideas and we have some evidence of what's happened before, and we have some signs that maybe it'll happen, but the rest of the truth is we don't really know. So how are we going to live our lives in all this not knowing stuff? What's going to give us the courage to walk toward it, especially as if the evidence points towards certain destruction? Where do we get our, Miss Mary says, our faith? A deep trust is what Miss Barbara said. Thank you. Well, we're called to walk by faith, and it takes courage, does it not? And because the believed in thing is unseen. So what does Hebrews mean when it says faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen? Well, in Hebrews, wasn't it 11? By faith all these people did these things. By faith Noah built an ark. Well, don't you know that looked kind of crazy to people who are watching him build it? I mean, where's the evidence? And so if you're a person watching him build this boat, and it might not have rained before then. We don't know for sure, I don't think. But if you're watching him build a boat on dry land and go ask him what he's doing, he said, well, we're going to have a flood. and you're looking around and the sun's shining or whatever it's doing, and at least it's not flooding, and you say, how do you know it's going to flood? What's your evidence? Well, what is the evidence? God told him. That's some evidence. And I'll tell you, I think another part of the evidence is he's building a boat. That is the evidence. Faith and you say, no, it's not either. But wait a minute. Did it flood? Yeah. So him building the boat was the evidence. So faith is the evidence. So faith is in a big part, a behavioral term. It's something that we do, which is in itself the evidence that the thing is there. And then we just go over there and find out if it's true, and we see if God's telling the truth or not. I believe that's how we grow our faith. But it requires courage, but it also builds courage, because when we see the evidences from before, we're more likely to do it again. Or at least I am. But when we're doing it, when we're building our faith, we're really talking about building a relationship with God, are we not? We're trying to determine, we're learning to determine that God is faithful and that he's trustworthy. And a walk by faith is, I think, the only way to do it, where we're trying to learn to put our full weight down on him and walk in that way. Well, here is a quandary I've had pretty much ever since I've started thinking about stuff like this, is how is it that a person... I grew up around a bunch of kids and watched what became of their lives, and I watched what became of my own life, and problems they've had and problems I've had. And I've noticed that it's possible to go to church pretty much all your life and fairly much prevent it from impacting your lifestyle very much. In other words, you can be a regular churchgoer and have a really terrible life. Have you all noticed that? Maybe in yourselves or in other people. Why in the world? How can that be? How can it happen like that? And a guy helped me with this a lot. One time he said, well, for instance, let's take school. We go to a place that we call school. And then we engage in a process there that we call education. But school and education are not the same, right? Because you can go to school and not get an education. Like Jerry Clower met Marcel Ledbetter coming back from school as Jerry was going to school. And Jerry said, where are you going? Marcel said, there ain't no point in going to school today. Somebody done let the air out the basketball. That's funny. Well, but it's possible to go to school and then engage in this process of education, but that's really not the goal of school. The goal of an education and school is knowledge. That's what we want. So, but school and education and knowledge are three different things. We hope we get knowledge. Well, we go to a place, let's say we'll call it church. We know the church is the people and it's not the building, but usually when we're assembling together, we talk about it as if we're going to church. So we go to a place we call church, and then when we're at church, we engage in this process that a lot of people call religion. But church and religion are two different things. But neither one are what we're really going for. What we're hoping to establish and maintain is a relationship with our Father, with God. That explains to me how you can go to church all your life and have a terrible life. Because the church and the religion didn't translate to a relationship with God. But when we're talking about having a faith walk, we're talking about a relationship with God. And And that doesn't make me against going to church because I do it all the time. It's a wonderful and beautiful thing that God wants us to do, is to assemble together. And it's because it promotes faith and promotes this walk with God. And it's really a neat thing. But I have a problem in that I fall asleep in church. Any of y'all? Don't raise your hand. Well, it bothers me a lot. And so I was talking to my buddy about it, and I said, Jerry, what? You know, going to church is a faith walk, isn't it? It requires faith to go to church. I said, Jerry, what's the point in me going to church? Because I fall asleep. And wouldn't I be better off to just not do that? He said, well, when you were little, you ate a lot of meals. And some of them you really hated. And some you really liked. And most of them you don't remember. But you grew up. I said, I get you. All right. I hear you. So if you're falling asleep in church and you think it's time to quit going to church, I want to submit to you that it's premature to know whether it's time to quit going to church or not, because I think you and I are changing accidentally. So let's exercise the faith that we have and don't give up on it, because God grows us into what he wants us to be. We walk by faith, and that encourages, it creates courage in us. So, and I believe, guys, that our courage can grow so that we insist upon doing the right thing even if it kills us. That's where I want to be. I think Benaiah had a good chance of getting killed by a lion. He might have thought he didn't, but I saw one time where a lion reached up and scratched a piece of meat that was 9 feet off the ground, and he was standing on his hind feet. A lion is big. I can reach 8 feet when I do that. That's 8 feet. Then there's a foot above that where the lion reached. They're big. Well, I digressed, didn't I? But look at Daniel. Daniel insisted on praying to God even if it was going to kill him, right? He knew he was going to get hurt or had a good chance of getting hurt if he didn't pray, but he did anyway. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what a great story that is. Nebuchadnezzar made the 90-foot tall statue of himself and said, on this particular day, you'll all bow down and worship this statue. And these three guys didn't do it. And I guess it was Nebuchadnezzar says, don't you know I can kill you if you don't do this? He said, well, and I wish I'd remembered the exact words, but their message was, we're not going to bow down to that statue because our God's able to deliver us. But even if he doesn't, I want you to know we're still not going to. What a great story. And you know the rest of that story, that they were thrown into the furnace. And then when they came out, they didn't even smell like smoke, and they weren't hurt at all. And there was a fourth person in there, according to what one of the guys saw. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the Daniel, we, I think, were made to be courageous. And one of the best ways we can exercise our faith is in words that we say. It takes courage to say words, particular words. And they're really powerful, because don't you know that a lot of our problems that we have in life were created by words? Maybe by some words other people said to us or words we say to ourselves. They have great destructive power, but words also have great healing power. Words can really, really help us. And if we learn to be courageous with the good words that build people up, That's a good way to walk our faith. That's a good way to exercise it. 65-year-old Winston Churchill had taken over the prime ministership of Great Britain a month or so before. June 16, 1940, France had expressed a desire to sign an armistice with Hitler in Germany. In other words, France got whipped. And Winston Churchill on June 18th delivered an address to the British people. It was a 36-minute address, and I wanted to read you 1 minute of it here. This is toward the end of his speech. And he said, "What General Weygand has called the Battle of France is over, and the Battle of Britain is about to begin. And upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands." He says, if we fail, though, then the whole world, including the United States, including all we've known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. And then he said this, "Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour." Have y'all heard that before? In 1862, Second Battle of the Bull Run, the northern forces had experienced a great defeat. And post-battle, Abraham Lincoln said this, "I've been driven many times upon my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and that of those about me seemed insufficient for that day." 1787, in trying to adopt the Constitution of the United States, they argued for weeks. 80 or 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin addressed the president and said, "In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when it's presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understandings? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. Well, to that kind providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend, or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance?" And then he said, "I've lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this fact. God governs in the affairs of men." And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We've been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And I firmly believe this. And a couple sentences later, he said, I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before proceeding to business, and that one or more of the clergy of this city be requested to officiate in that service. They had hard times. In the low ebb of human life, human civilization, people voiced these words and inspired huge numbers of people. And we've come to believe of these people as great men, but they weren't great men, they were just men. Winston Churchill had notes all over his paper. He was writing up till the time he started talking, trying to figure out exactly the right kind of words to say. And they said that in his closing statements, he wrote those words in blank verse, which most scholars agree was influenced by the Psalms of David, of which Winston Churchill was accustomed to reading. Well, I want to say to us that I think we have the same power to inspire people with our words when we're walking by faith that these guys did. We might not be able to speak to millions, but we can speak to one. And how many is that to God? That's a bunch. And we have the ability to do it. Now, we might not be called on or have a chance to go into a pit on a snowy day and kill the lion, but the chances are slim of that. But the chances of us being able to use our words to build up our fellow Christians or to build up other people who are suffering in the world, that's almost 100% a chance of doing that. So we're called to be bold, and we're called to be courageous. And the power of word is really powerful. Do you know Alexander the Great? Darius was a king of Persia. He's not to be confused with Darius, who was the Mede, who was with Daniel back a few hundred years earlier. But his dad was Philip. And but his mom lied to him and said his dad was Zeus. And she kind of implied to him that he was a god, and Alexander started believing that. And in fact, he went somewhere between Egypt and Libya one time to an oracle who was in an oasis out in the desert, and that oracle confirmed to him that, yeah, he was a god. And Alexander was about conquering the world. He wanted to really conquer the world. But he set his eyes on Tyre and Sidon, which are in the Bible. They're a seaport on the Mediterranean Sea there. They're cities. And he conquered Tyre, and he was in the siege of Sidon. And he wasn't very far. I don't know how many miles it is over to Jerusalem from there, but it's not that many miles. And he sent over to the high priest of Jerusalem and said, "Send us provisions." And the high priest of Jerusalem refused. And he said, "I'm not going to do that because I've sworn to King Darius that as long as he's alive, I won't serve anybody else." Well, it made Alexander really mad. And he said, "Well, I'll tend to you after this." And so he took Sidon, and then he marched on Jerusalem, and it got the high priest of Jerusalem really scared. So he prayed to God. And I'll just read this out of Josephus. It's what the historian says about him. Alexander came to Syria and took Damascus, and when he had obtained Sidon, he besieged Tyre. When he sent an epistle, he took Sidon first. He sent an epistle to the Jewish high priest to send him some auxiliaries and to supply his army with provisions. But the high priest answered that he had given his oath to Darius not to bear arms against him, and he said he wouldn't transgress this while Darius was in the land of the living. And upon hearing this answer, Alexander was very angry. And though he determined not to leave Tyre, which was just ready to be taken, but as soon as he had taken it, he threatened that he would make an expedition against the Jewish high priest, and through him teach all men to whom they must keep their oaths. Well, Alexander, when he had taken another city, Gaza, made haste to go up to Jerusalem. And Joshua, the high priest, when he heard it, was in agony and under terror, and not knowing how he had meet the Macedonians, since the king was displeased at his disobedience. He therefore ordained that the people should make supplications and join with him in offering sacrifices to God, whom he besought to protect that nation. And so he did, and he made a procession out. He and his priest put a diadem on his head. They got in these white robes and walked out and met Alexander. And Alexander, when he went out to meet him, fell down on his knees and worshiped. And his leader, Parmenio, said, "Wait, how is it that all people worship you, but you come and worship this guy?" He said, "I'm not worshiping that guy." He said, "I'm worshiping the God who that guy represents." They said, "How'd you know that?" Well, he had a dream. And when he was trying to figure out how he was going to take over the world, he dreamt that he saw this guy in this diadem, and this guy would show him that he was going to take over the world. And so he went up and ate with the Jews, and they showed him the book of Daniel, in which it said, Greece will whip Persia. Well, the high priest and all the people of Jerusalem were facing sure death, but they went on a word from God. God told them what to do. And they walked out there and they were delivered in a mighty way based on a word from God. We have the exact same options every day of our life. We know what the Word of God is. We have the ability to walk that way. Even if we're not totally sure, even if we're a little bit scared, we still have the ability to walk this faith, and it builds our relationship with God. Aren't those some good thoughts? I really love that. I'm not sure I'm saying them right, but I sure am sure it's a good message. It's a good message we hear from the Scriptures.